I cried the day Michael Jordan retired. Odd little sentence to take out of context, I know, but I have to ask, which time? The time he retired for baseball? The time he retired because of the player lockout? Or the time he retired because no one cares about the Washington Wizards? Seriously, the amount of times this guy retired rivals Hayao Miyazaki.
It shows us all the places that we want to go and look. Superbook!
Welcome back, everyone, to Alternate Reality Autumn! This is the second of 3 reviews that look at the Animorph books that take place outside of regular continuity, be it through time travel, simulation, or rushed non-canon merchandise. And now we find ourselves at the end of an era, as Megamorphs number 4, Back to Before, is the last of the Megamorphs line. This is it, people. We are slowly revving up to the final arc. So before we get into it, let's take a quick look back at Megamorphs and what these books have accomplished up to this point. Megamorphs number 1, The Analyte's Gift, was a largely mindless blockbuster action romp with a couple of chuckle moments, but largely didn't contribute anything to the series. Megamorphs number 2, In the Time of Dinosaurs, was an immensely stupid book written solely to be overmarketed. Its contributions to the series are largely ignored, especially the horrifying character assassination of Tobias, which saw him commit genocide on faulty information. Megamorphs number 3, Elfinger's Secret, was an over-the-top time travel extravaganza that failed to really cement its various themes, but it still stood out among the Megamorphs line by not totally sucking. And again, nothing really contributed to the series besides tying up the loose Time Matrix plot thread. Megamorph's lack of contribution to the series ends today. With only 2 main event books left, one Megamorphs and one Chronicles, it seems the decision was made to focus these 2 books on the one remaining mystery of the series, the conflict between the Elements and the Crayak. Just who are these guys? How do they operate, and why do they seem so focused on Earth, the Yeerk invasion, and the Animorphs specifically? The answer should be, they are mysterious creatures who work in mysterious ways and our puny human minds cannot possibly comprehend them, because taking the mystery out of something this cosmic is something you only do when you have a really, really, really good idea. Remember when they tried to boil down the Q in Star Trek Voyager? Yeah, it sucked. Remember when Star Wars told us that the Force was germs? Also sucked. Granted, the bulk of that will be in the Elements Chronicles, but this book will help us see just how this game between the Elements and Crayak is played, and why the Animorphs are so central to it. So yeah, if you have to read one Megamorphs book, make it this one. It also doesn't hurt to have Kay Applegate writing for these characters again. There have been some solid ghostwriters out there, but reading Catherine Applegate and Michael Grant again is like opening the door to let some fresh air in. I tried to lift up with all 4 legs, lift the dead thing off me. But I only had 3 legs. My left hind leg lay across the bright lit floor, a curiosity, a macabre relic. Tiger's paw. Okay, dark as fuck, fresh air, but still. The book opens with the aftermath of a battle between the Animorphs and some Yeerk soldiers. As the Animorphs regroup and lick their wounds, one single human controller cries weakly, the Yeerk unable to leave its human host. Jake can do nothing but walk away as the Yeerk moans about being cold and wishing the pain would end. Not an easy thing for anyone to deal with, and Jake is taking it harder than usual this evening as he reflects on a reoccurring nightmare he's been having. Jake narrates, "But the worst dream is just me and Cassie, and we're standing in the forest somewhere. She's outlined in light, like there's a bright light hidden behind her, and it's almost like she's shining. And there's this cave, and I'm telling her to go in, and she's looking at me with trust in her eyes, looking at me and loving me and believing in me and trusting me, and I'm telling her to go into the cave." It's upon this reflection that the Droid shows up in Jake's bedroom. It seems the Crayak has negotiated something with the Elements, and now he offers Jake the chance to escape it all. By saying the words, Crayak, please. The Crayak will rewrite history so that the Animorphs never encountered Elfangor that fateful night, never gained their morphing powers, never entered the fight against the Yeerks. It's a tempting offer, unless you think about it, but Jake is tired and the Droid is pushy. We never actually see him say it. The next chapter begins with Cassie and Rachel in the mall, and it takes a couple of pages before the reader realizes things have gone back in time. We're back in the beginning, in the opening of number 1 The Invasion, as 5 normal teenagers meet up in the mall and decide to take a shortcut through the construction site. This chapter is narrated by Cassie, giving us a fresh perspective of familiar events. You know, that thing Alternamorphs could have done, but instead had you sleep through everything. Cassie and Rachel are shopping, Cassie describing Rachel's shopping habits similar to that of a professional hunter. The two of them see Jake, Marco, and Tobias walking away from the arcade, and Cassie reflects on her crush on Jake. Cassie narrates. I asked her once, "Do you think he's okay with me being African American and all?" She said, "Cassie, I've known Jake all my life. Believe me, he doesn't know you're black. That's how little he would care. Jake is the one guy out of 1,000 who really does care about who you are, not what you look like." I know some people don't like this passage, and I kinda get it. For one, it's kind of a jarring moment, as Animorphs rarely touches on race, especially the implications of Cassie being African American. I think the only time it's actually factored into the story was Megamorphs 3, when Cassie went back in time to beat up racists as a polar bear. This level of insecurity from Cassie never comes up again, and that makes sense on a text level. Cassie is a little preoccupied with the whole Balian invasion thing to deal with her relationship with her race. And yeah, Catherine Applegate and Michael Grant are 2 white people, and it would probably be wise not to delve into something this touchy with which they have 0 real-life experience with. But probably the bigger issue with this passage is the phrasing. Jake doesn't see color. Jake is the one guy out of 1,000 who really does care who you are, not what you look like. Yeah, Cassie, you being black is a problem most of the time, but with Jake, it's cool. Yeah, I know, the writers meant well. It was just a bit that could have used a bit more of a critical eye, you know? Anyway, the scene plays out like it did in the first book. The 5 kids group up, we get the same bits of dialogue, with Jake trying to play knight in shining armor and Rachel calling him out on his shit, and then finally them crossing the construction site. Only this time, no ship lands, no dying alien, no warning of alien invasion. Everyone goes home, completely oblivious. It's about a week later. We get a chapter where we finally see how horrible Tobias' life has been before the Animorphs. In the TV show, Tobias had a slightly annoying aunt who gave him nicknames, and he dealt with slightly annoying short guys. Here, however, we see a Tobias who has to sleep on the couch because his uncle has passed out drunk in his bedroom. We see a Tobias who is constantly being assaulted by bullies, getting shoved and punched with consistent schedule, and he doesn't have anyone to talk to. Tobias narrates, I hung around with him for a while. Totally lame on my part. Jake has a best friend who doesn't like me, I don't think. And after a while, it was kind of obvious that I wasn't going to be part of that circle of friends. So it should come to no surprise that when Tobias crosses paths with a spokesman for the sharing, it immediately appeals to him. Since we've brought up the specter of anti-TV, I suppose it's time to bring up Season 1, Episode 18, Not My Problem again. It's the same kind of It's a Wonderful Life plot where we see the consequences of the Animorphs not getting their powers. Not My Problem is often said to be based on Megamorphs number 4, but in truth, the episode predates this book by over a year. And since Kay Applegate never watched the show after the first couple of episodes, what we have here is a rare occurrence of 2 separate versions of a property coming up with the same basic premise while completely isolated from each other. So what can we learn when comparing these 2 versions? The biggest difference is that in their respective alternate universes, Tobias and Jake's roles are reversed. In Megamorphs number 4, Jake remains skeptical of the sharing despite his brother's insistence on him joining, while Tobias takes to them pretty quickly. In Not My Problem, Jake joins the sharing and becomes a controller pretty quickly, while Tobias is an antagonizing agent against the Yeerks. What this says about both versions of these characters is pretty telling. Even when he's not aware of a secret alien invasion, Book Jake's default mode is that of a level-headed skeptic that allows him to weigh options and make sound decisions. Except for those moments when he has a complete mental breakdown and starts throwing whales at things. Tobias, on the other hand, is a complete emotional shut-in and can be susceptible to things that promise him a better life. And that tends to lend him into a horrible path, gets him into trouble. He took to the whole being a superhero thing so hard that he basically crashed and got trapped in Hawkmorph. We even see this after he becomes a Nothlit, such as in number 23, The Pretender, when he's suddenly faced with the promise of family. So it's perfectly in line that he would be attracted to the sharing, and he's exactly the kind of kid the sharing aims for. In the Annie TV universe, though, these characterizations are kind of reversed. As I brought up earlier, TV Tobias didn't have nearly as bad a life as his book counterpart, and his status as a loner isn't brought about because he's a bully magnet. I mean, look at him. The black jacket, the hair, the crowd that gathers to watch him play video games, his walking through the construction site alone. He's not a weak, defeated kid. He's the local legend. Annie TV totally intended for Tobias to be the show's badass, which could have worked. I've said before that I have nothing against changing things from the book in principle. The problem with this is when the writers try to mash some of the book Tobias's characterization into their badass loner character. TV Jake, on the other hand, is more outwardly emotional. The book Jake was also emotional, but kept it all pretty bottled up. TV Jake is more prone to emotional outbursts and being all woe is me. Book Jake accepted the droid's offer because he just got out of an emotionally draining bit of combat and had to leave an enemy to die a slow death, and he'd been having reoccurring nightmares about the ones he loves dying. TV Jake accepted the Elvis offer because he had a bad day at school, and Tom's friends were a little weird. TV Jake is basically Jake in 100% throwaway whale at it mode. Really what I'm saying is that each version is very true to their interpretations of these characters. Speaking of the sharing, this is really the only book that takes an extensive look at how the sharing operates. It's always going on in the background, and is supposedly a cornerstone in Visor 1's plans for invasion, but the Animorphs have never really dealt with it, too distracted by whatever Visor 3's megalomania has conjured up this time. We see it the weekly group meetings, we see kids like Tobias getting buddied up with long-term members called guides who do fun things with them. In Tobias' case, he's taught pool by a guy named Bill, and actually gets pretty good at it. The sharing is basically the averaging out of all the major youth programs that were big in the 1990s. The Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, Boys and Girls Club of America, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, DARE, an infinite amount of religious groups. If the sharing wasn't a secular organization, I bet they'd be listening to a lot of Jars of Clay. Tobias narrates, "Why me? The question was impossible to avoid. How did I fit into this group? Was it really true that the sharing didn't care if you were young or old, male, female, black, white, Asian, Christian, Jew, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, straight, gay, rich, or poor?" The sharing is basically the 90s ideal youth culture given flesh, the very American, all-culture encompassing period where instead of really celebrating our differences, we homogenize them, pretending they didn't really exist beyond the superficial. Yes, the sharing doesn't care if you're any of those things, Tobias, because to acknowledge those things is to acknowledge that people are different and have different issues to address. And we just don't do that in the 90s, or at least good people don't do that in the 90s. Good people like Jake, who doesn't care that Cassie's African American, who doesn't see color. Maybe that bit works after all. But at the end of it all this sharing is a way to coerce people into giving up their identities. We witness in horror as Tobias is made a full member, being brought into a room with several people, including Chapman and a Mr. Visor, because Visor 3 is just that uncreative. Tobias narrates, "Why do you wish to join us?" I shrugged. Because you know, what they're always talking about, with what Mr. Visor was saying, being part of something greater than myself, part of something big. Chapman glanced at Mr. Visor. Nervously, I thought. Mr. Visor took a deep breath. "Is all of this necessary?" Chapman said, "Receptivity is helpful, Visor. There's a less chance of..." of problems later. Yes, yes, but get on with it. At which point Tobias is put into handcuffs and has his head forced into a harness. Not long after, he becomes a controller. Since Chapman brought up being receptive to becoming a host, I always wondered what the deal was with those voluntary controllers in number one, The Invasion. You know, the ones that got to sit around and watch TV and eat pizza while the Yeerks fed in their Yeerk pool. They never really pop up again, mostly because the idea of voluntary controllers being traitors to the human race was subverted in the very next book, with Chapman becoming one to save his daughter. And now here, the idea of voluntary controllers has changed from people who are totally on board with having a Yeerk in their head in exchange for wealth or power or whatever, to people who are naive enough to be slightly open to the idea of being part of a vague something. Because after this point, Tobias is actually referred to as a voluntary controller. Tobias' new Yeerk is Audrit 177. And for Tobias, he's just another bully who's keeping him down. Only, an alien. Audrit's job is as a messenger, supposedly from the Council of 13, but Tobias becomes aware that this is a deception, and Audrit is secretly an agent of Visser 1, giving Visser 3 false information, saying that the Council has denied the use of open attacks on Earth. Of course, this doesn't make Visser 3 happy, so some days later, he requests Audrit's audience, and then threatens him with Kandrona starvation if he doesn't tell the truth. Visser 3 doesn't really know if Audrit works for Visser 1 or not, but the threat works. Tobias narrates, "I saw in Audrit's mind's eye the results. So did he. Kandrona starvation was a horror that cannot be endured. I looked straight into Visser 3's Andalite eyes. The Council knows nothing. Visser 1 hopes to convince them to restrain you. She sent me to delay you till the Council issues the order, but it will come." Visser 3 nodded. "As I suspected. I'll have to move quickly. Very quickly, and present the Council with a done deed. Then the order will be irrelevant." "I work for you, then?" Audrit asked pitifully. Visser 3 laughed. "You betrayed Visser 1, Audrit. Should I keep you around to betray me?" "Kill him." A Hork-Bajir pressed a Dracon beam against my head. I felt it. Felt Audrit's terror. Felt my own shock, fear, regret. "No!" my mouth cried. "No!" Felt slight pressure as the Hork-Bajir's finger tightened. Felt... And then the passage just cuts off. So Tobias is dead. Okay. So I guess no more chapters from him.